My name is Davrin Kyle, and I have died 5 times in 3 days. Not metaphorically, not approximately. 5 times I have felt my heart stop beating, felt my consciousness collapse into darkness, felt the absolute certainty of death. And 5 times I have been dragged back, resuscitated, restarted like a malfunctioning machine because the message I was carrying was more important than whether I was alive or dead to deliver it. The collar around my neck weighs 7 kilograms. It's crude Imperial technology, a frag charge wired to a countdown timer, waterproofed in rubberized casing, locked with a mechanism that only the command officers possess the key to. The digital counter glows red against my throat. 9:47. 9 minutes and 47 seconds to cross 800 meters of no man's land. I deliver the sealed orders clutched in my chemical-burned hand and receive the deactivation code before the charge converts my head into red mist and bone fragments. I am standing in Trench Sigma 7 on a planet called Vulcan's Rest, though nothing here has rested in 7 months, waiting for the whistle that will send me running through hell again. The mud beneath my boots is not entirely mud. It's approximately 60% liquefied human remains, according to the field analysis I overheard a Medicae mention once, mixed with clay soil and chemical runoff from the bombardments. The trenches smell like copper and rot and burnt promethium, a smell so constant that I can no longer remember what clean air tastes like. I have survived 5 runs. 173 other runners have died in the same 3 days. The statistical probability of my continued survival is 0.0029%. I am an anomaly. A miracle, the propaganda officers call it. Proof that the Emperor protects his faithful. But the Emperor doesn't protect. I know this now. I've run across those killing fields, felt last rounds punch through the air centimeters from my skull, watched men beside me dissolve in artillery fire, seen the evidence accumulate with each impossible survival. There is no divine hand preserving me. Only probability, only chaos, only the random mathematics of death that has somehow, inexplicably, miscalculated me 5 times in a row. I'm not blessed, I'm cursed with survival, and in 7 minutes I will run again. But let me tell you how I got here. Let me tell you about Davrin Kyle before he became a message with legs, and before his life was measured in 10-minute intervals, before he learned that the human body can die and be restarted and die again as long as there's still message to deliver. Let me tell you about the last time I was human. 3 weeks ago, I was a Vox operator in the 34th Vulcan Infantry Regiment, assigned to company command in the relatively safe sectors, 15 kilometers behind the front lines. My job was simple: receive transmissions, decode basic encryption, relay orders to unit commanders. It was boring work, repetitive work, but it was safe. The sound of artillery was distant thunder. The smell of death was an abstract concept carried on the wind. I was 22 years old, which made me young by Imperial Guard standards, but ancient by the standards of this war. Now, the average life expectancy on Vulcan's Rest was 6 weeks after deployment. I'd been here for 11 months. I'd survived by being unremarkable, by being competent but not exceptional, by staying in the rear echelons where the Emperor's propaganda claimed heroes were forged, but where, in reality, clerks and operators simply didn't die as quickly as the men in the trenches. My father had been a guardsman too, Sergeant Theron Kale, killed 7 years ago on a world whose name I never learned, his body never recovered, his death verified only by a casualty report that listed him as KIA, biomass unrecoverable. My younger brother Cassian had been conscripted 2 years ago, sent to a different regiment, a different war. I didn't know if he was alive. The Administratum didn't waste resources tracking family connections across the Imperium's endless wars. I joined the Guard voluntarily, a decision motivated not by patriotism, but by mathematics. On my hive world, Corvast Prime, Unemployment meant starvation. The guard offered guaranteed meals, guaranteed shelter, guaranteed purpose. That the purpose was dying for the Imperium seemed like a distant problem compared to the immediate problem of surviving poverty. The recruiters had promised glory, honor, the Emperor's protection for those who served faithfully. They'd showed us propaganda reels of victorious campaigns, of heroes receiving commendations, of the grateful citizens of liberated worlds. They'd made war look clean, purposeful, noble. They'd lied about everything except the guaranteed meals. I remember one specific day, 3 weeks and 4 days ago, sitting in the communications bunker with the other Vox operators. There were 6 of us. Me, a man named Joran who'd been an accountant before conscription, a quiet boy named Petrick who couldn't have been older than 17, and 3 others whose names I've forgotten because they died when the bunker was hit 2 weeks later. We were eating our rations. Corpse starch formed into bars, flavored with chemical nutrients that were supposed to prevent deficiency diseases, and Joran was complaining about the monotony. 11 months, he said, his voice carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd survived long enough to realize survival was its own kind of torture. 11 months of listening to Vox static and decoding the same 3 orders. Hold position, advance 2 meters, retreat 1 meter. This isn't war. It's bureaucracy with artillery. Better than the trenches, I'd said, because it was true. We could hear the front lines from the bunker, a constant background of explosions, weapons fire, screaming. Sometimes the screaming lasted for hours. Sometimes it stopped suddenly, and that was worse than the screaming because you knew why it had stopped. They told us the Emperor protects, Petrick said quietly. He was the most devout among us, the one who actually believed the propaganda, who said prayers before eating his rations. That if we serve faithfully, he'll shield us from harm. Joran had laughed, a bitter sound, empty of humor. The Emperor protects the administratum's supply lines, so that's what he protects. Us? We're line items on a logistics report. Infantry, expendable, quantity, 40,000 per regiment, expected loss rate, 92% per campaign. That's what protection looks like in the Guard. I'd agreed with Joran, but I hadn't said so. Petrick's faith seemed to comfort him, and I'd seen what happened to men who lost that comfort. They stopped caring whether they lived or died, and on Vorkan's Rest, not caring was the fastest way to end up as part of the mud. Then the order came through that changed everything. Priority Directive, Command Authorization, Level 3, Communication Infrastructure, Compromised Vox Network Non-Functional, due to atmospheric interference. Alternative Message Delivery System required all communication personnel to report to Trench Sigma. 7. For reassignment. We'd looked at each other in the bunker, in confusion mixing with the first stirrings of fear. Reassignment could mean anything in the Imperial Guard, promotion, execution, or anything in between. But communication personnel getting reassigned to the trenches? That was unusual. That meant something had gone badly wrong. The Emperor protects, Petrick whispered, more to himself than to us. Joran didn't respond. Neither did I. We simply gathered our equipment and prepared to report, because in the Guard, orders weren't suggestions. The walk from the command bunker to Trench Sigma 7 took 3 hours through the communication trenches. Narrow corridors, carved into the mud, shored up with scavenged metal and corpses where the metal ran out. The smell got worse as we moved forward. The sound of artillery got louder. The mud got deeper, got wetter, got redder. And I remember thinking, this is wrong. This is a mistake. Vox operators don't belong in the frontline trenches. We're support personnel, technical specialists. This is a bureaucratic error. But there was no error. When we arrived at Trench Sigma 7, we found 200 other communication personnel. Vox operators, clerks, data analysts, anyone with literacy and basic encoding training, all gathered in a section of trench reinforced with actual concrete instead of corpse walls. A commissar was waiting. I didn't catch his name. Commissars rarely bothered introducing themselves to enlisted men. But I remember his face, angular, scarred, completely empty of mercy. He wore the black uniform immaculately, despite the mud. His bolt pistol was polished to reflection, and his expression suggested he'd executed men that morning and would execute more before sleep. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice cutting through the artillery noise without needing amplification. "The Vox network has failed, atmospheric conditions, enemy jamming, mechanical failure. The cause is irrelevant. What matters is that command cannot communicate with forward units, and forward units cannot communicate with command. In modern warfare, communication breakdown is fatal. Units become isolated. Coordination fails. The enemy exploits the confusion." He paused, his eyes scanning across us like targeting algorithms evaluating threats. "Therefore, we return to the oldest method of battlefield communication. Runners. You will carry written orders from command to forward units and return with written reports. And you will run through no man's land, the area between our trenches and the enemy's trenches, approximately 800 meters of open ground under constant fire. Speed is essential. If orders are not delivered within 10 minutes, tactical situations change and the orders become obsolete, potentially causing catastrophic failures." Another pause. Some of the men around me had gone pale. Others looked confused, as if they didn't yet understand what the commissar was describing. "To ensure maximum speed and prevent cowardice, you will wear these." He gestured, and servitors emerged from a bunker entrance carrying metal collars. Each one was identical: heavy steel construction, digital timer, obvious explosive charge, locking mechanism. "Frag collars," the commissar continued, "set for 10-minute countdown, and the timer begins when you leave our trench. If you return successfully, we deactivate it. If you fail to return within 10 minutes, the charge detonates. This serves dual purpose. It motivates speed, and it prevents the enemy from capturing messengers alive and extracting intelligence through interrogation." Horror settled over the assembled men like a physical weight. This wasn't communication work. This was execution with a chance of survival. "This is murder," someone said. I think it was Joran, but the voice was distorted by fear and I couldn't be certain. The commissar's bolt pistol was in his hand instantly, pressed against the speaker's forehead before anyone could react. "This is war. You have been reassigned according to tactical necessity. You will serve, or you will die here. Choose." He pulled the trigger. The bolt round converted Joran's head into an explosion of gore that splattered across a dozen men. The body collapsed into the mud, twitching, blood pooling and mixing with the liquefied dead that composed the trench floor. "Anyone else have questions about their assignment?" Silence. Total, absolute silence, except for the artillery and the dripping sound of Joran's blood. "Form a line. Receive your collar. Your first run begins in 20 minutes. I'd stood in that line, numb with shock, and let them lock the collar around my neck. The metal was cold. The weight was immediate, constant, a reminder with every breath. The timer wasn't active yet. Wouldn't activate until I began my run, but I could feel it there, waiting to count down my life in 10-minute intervals. They gave me a sealed message tube, metal cylinder with orders inside, encrypted with basic codes, marked with priority indicators I'd learned to read during Vox operator training. They gave me a map of no man's land with the fastest routes marked. They gave me exactly 90 seconds of instruction. Run fast, run straight, don't stop for wounded, don't deviate from the marked path. The areas are mined. When you reach the target trench, hand the message to the commanding officer. Get the written reply, run back. If you hear incoming artillery, keep running. Stopping makes you a stationary target. If you're hit, keep running until you physically cannot. The message is more important than your life. The Emperor protects the faithful. The Emperor protects. Even then, terrified and collar-locked and facing probable death, I'd recognize the phrase for what it was. Propaganda designed to make soldiers accept the unacceptable. The Emperor wasn't going to protect me during my run across 800 meters of killing ground. The Emperor was somewhere on Terra, seated on his golden throne, so far removed from this mud-soaked hell that his protection was a meaningless concept. But I was going to run anyway, because the alternative was a bolt round to the head. I remember my last thought before the whistle blew, before the timer activated, before I climbed out of the trench and started running toward probability of death. I joined the guard to avoid starvation, and now I'm going to die delivering mail. The irony would have been funny if I'd had time to appreciate it. Then the whistle blew. The timer on my collar flickered to life. 10 o'clock. And I ran. The first 10 steps out of the trench were the worst. Not physically. I was young, relatively fit, capable of running 800 meters in under 10 minutes under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. I was running into open ground that every enemy weapon system was aimed at, ground that had been killing men by thousands for 7 months, ground that was less terrain and more mass grave. The whistle had sent 10 of us over the trench wall simultaneously. Command strategy for runner deployment, we'd learned in the 90-second briefing, was overwhelming the enemy's targeting capacity with multiple targets. Some would die. Statistically, 1 or 2 might survive. The Emperor protects, they'd said, and which really meant probability protects if we throw enough bodies at the problem. I'd climbed out of the trench using the corpse ladder, bodies of previous attackers piled against the wall, held in place by mud and wire, their dead flesh providing purchase for boots. My hands touched a face, cold and waxy. My foot found a rib cage, bones cracking under my weight. I didn't look down. Looking meant thinking. Thinking meant hesitating. Hesitation meant death. Then I was over the wall, standing in no man's land, and the world became sensory overload. Sight. The ground stretched ahead for 800 meters, a landscape of craters, barbed wire, corpses, burned-out vehicles, more corpses. The mud was red-brown-black, churned by artillery until no natural earth remained. Shell holes filled with water that wasn't water, blood, chemical runoff, or liquefied flesh. Bodies everywhere, in every state of decay, fresh kills from hours ago, still bleeding into the mud, bloated corpses from days ago, swelling with bacterial gases, skeletal remains from weeks ago, picked clean by whatever survived in this wasteland. Sound. Artillery screaming overhead, our guns firing toward enemy lines, their guns firing toward ours, the shells crossing in midair with sounds like tearing metal. Weapons fire, laser guns, autoguns, heavy bolters, all creating a constant crackling roar. Explosions, near, far, constant, and screaming, always screaming, from wounded men in shell holes, from men dying slowly, from men who'd been screaming so long they'd forgotten why they started. Smell. Rot, overwhelming, gagging rot. Decomposition accelerated by chemical weapons, by the heat of explosives, by sheer concentration of death, mixed with promethium, with burned flesh, with the acrid tang of last fire, with chemical weapons that smelled like almonds and copper. My respirator filtered some of it, but not enough. Never enough. Touch. Mud. Immediately, I was ankle-deep in mud that grabbed my boots, that tried to hold me in place. The texture was wrong, too soft, too yielding, occasionally hard when my foot hit something solid. Bone, equipment, corpses compressed into the substrate. Cold water soaked through my uniform instantly. Chemical burns started where the mud touched exposed skin. Taste, blood and copper and chemicals. The air itself had flavor, toxic, metallic, organic. My mouth was dry with fear, but wet with the particulate matter suspended in the atmosphere. though the vaporized remains of men and equipment reduced to breathable particles. The timer on my collar, 9:45. I ran. Not in a straight line. The map had marked the safest routes through the minefields, paths where previous runners had survived, where the density of unexploded ordnance was lowest. I followed these paths, my boots splashing through the red mud, my heart already hammering, my breath coming in gasps through the respirator. 5 seconds into the run, the man to my left, a young clerk whose name I'd never learned, stepped on something that clicked. He had maybe half a second to register what that sound meant before the mine detonated, converting his lower body into a spray of meat and bone. He fell forward, still alive, still conscious, screaming as he tried to crawl with arms alone. I ran past him. Had to. Stopping meant dying. So the message was more important than mercy. 15 seconds into the run, the enemy guns found us. I heard the distinctive crack hiss of laser gun fire, saw the air superheat in beams of red light that punched through the men around me. One runner ahead of me took a last round through the spine. I watched the hole burn through his uniform, saw him fall face first into the mud, saw the mud around him start bubbling from the heat of the wound. I adjusted my path, ran around his body, kept moving. 30 seconds into the run. Artillery. I heard it before I saw it. The descending whistle of shells incoming, getting louder, getting closer. Training took over. I threw myself into a shell crater, landing in water that was chest deep and warm and thick with something I didn't want to identify. The explosion hit 20 meters away. I'm close enough that the shockwave hammered my body, close enough that debris rained down, mud, metal fragments, body parts from whoever had been closer. The timer. 9:15. I climbed out of the crater, my uniform now soaked, weighted with mud and water, my boots filled with liquid that squelched with every step. I kept running. 1 minute into the run. I could see the pattern now. The enemy wasn't shooting blindly. They had targeting patterns, zones of fire designed to maximize kill efficiency. The routes on my map were designed to minimize exposure to these zones, but minimize didn't mean avoid. I was going to have to run through targeted areas. There was no way around. The runner nearest me, 20 meters ahead, moving fast, entered a kill zone. And I watched 5 different weapons find him simultaneously. Laser gun beams punching through his chest, autocannon rounds tearing his left arm off, something heavier, probably a las cannon, cutting him in half at the waist. His top half kept moving for 3 steps, propelled by momentum, before collapsing into the mud. The collar around his severed neck was still counting down. 0847. In 8 minutes and 47 seconds, that charge would detonate, destroying evidence that would never be recovered anyway. I ran through the same kill zone and nothing hit me. Pure chance. Random mathematics. The guns were firing at where I'd been, where I should be, everywhere except where I actually was. I didn't feel blessed. I felt like probability had malfunctioned. 3 minutes into the run, my lungs were burning. The respirator filtered toxins but couldn't increase oxygen capacity, and I was running through mud, in wet uniform, under fire, while adrenaline consumed energy faster than my body could produce it. My legs felt heavy. My vision was starting to blur at the edges. But the timer was at 7:12, and I was maybe halfway across, and slowing down meant dying. I saw a hand reaching out of the mud, someone buried, still alive, trying to signal for help. I ran past, had to. The message was more important than rescue. 5 minutes into the run, the artillery intensified. Both sides firing for effect, the shells crossing overhead in a metal rain. Some were hitting no man's land, random impacts, the gunners not caring if they hit their own men caught in the open. A shell landed 15 meters ahead, close enough that I felt the heat. I felt the fragments whip past my head. The explosion crater it created was massive, 10 meters across, 3 meters deep, filled instantly with groundwater and chemicals. I had to go round it. The detour cost me 30 seconds I didn't have. Timer, 0519. 7 minutes into the run, I could see the target trench. Sigma 9, marked with identification banners that stood out against the mud and corpses. 200 meters away. Achievable if nothing else killed me. If I didn't step on a mine, if the artillery didn't find me, if my heart didn't explode from exhaustion, if 150 meters. A runner ahead of me, someone who'd started faster, reached the trench and dove over the wall to safety. He'd made it, proof that survival was possible. 100 meters. My boots found something soft. A body, recent kill. Still warm. No, I stepped on it for purchase, felt ribs crack under my weight, kept running. The corpse's face stared up at nothing, eyes empty, mouth open in permanent surprise. 50 meters. The mud got deeper here, where drainage from both trench systems pooled. I was running through knee-deep sludge, each step requiring double effort, my thighs screaming, my heart hammering like artillery in my chest. Timer, 0247. 20 meters. I could see soldiers in the trench, their faces appearing over the wall, watching my approach. Some looked impressed. Some looked like they'd seen this hundreds of times before. Some looked like they were taking bets on whether I'd make it or die in the final stretch. 10 meters. Last rounds cracked past my head, the enemy guns making final attempts to kill me before I reached safety. But I felt heat as one beam passed centimeters from my ear. Smelled my hair burning, kept running. 5 meters. The trench wall ahead, corpse ladder already in place. I could see hands reaching down to help pull me in. Then my foot hit wire, buried barbed wire, hidden under the mud, part of defensive barriers I hadn't seen. It caught my boot, tangled, and I fell forward, full momentum, unable to catch myself. I hit the mud face first, the impact driving air from my lungs, the message tube crushed between my chest and the ground. Timer, 0104. I scrambled to my feet, slipping in the mud, tasting blood and chemicals, the wire still tangled around my ankle. 1 minute and 4 seconds. 15 meters from safety. I reached down, ripped the wire away. It cut through my glove, cut into my hand, but pain didn't matter, and ran the final distance. And soldiers grabbed me, hauled me over the trench wall, and I collapsed into trench Sigma 9 with the timer reading 0038, 38 seconds to spare. I lay in the mud at the bottom of the trench, my entire body shaking, my lungs heaving, my vision swimming. Someone was yelling at me, words I couldn't process through the adrenaline and exhaustion. Then hands grabbed the message tube, extracted it from my grip, opened it. An officer, lieutenant by the rank insignia, read the orders, then looked at me with something like pity. "You need to run back," he said. "I have a written reply. You need to deliver it to command." I wanted to scream, wanted to refuse, wanted to explain that I'd just survived 800 meters of hell and couldn't possibly do it again, not immediately. And not while my legs were still shaking and my lungs were still burning. But the collar was already being reset. A tech priest with mechanical fingers entered the new timer, 10 o'clock. "Rest period, 3 minutes, the lieutenant said. "Then you run back. The Emperor protects, soldier." The Emperor protects. As if divine intervention, not blind probability, had gotten me across no man's land alive. I had 3 minutes to prepare to do it again. That was when I realized this wasn't a single mission. This was my life now. Run, survive, run again, repeat until probability finally corrected itself, and I died like the other runners. I was no longer a Vox operator, no longer a person with purpose beyond the immediate. I was a message delivery system, a letter with legs, and the stamps were made of my own blood. I survived the first run by accident, a pure probability malfunction, but Command didn't see it that way. They saw a runner who'd crossed no man's land in under 10 minutes and returned with a reply in under 10 minutes, making 2 successful runs when 90% of runners died on their first attempt. They saw value, reusable value. So they sent me again, and again, and again. By the end of that first day, I'd run the killing grounds 4 times. 4 crossings, each one identical and different. Same 800 meters, same mud and corpses and artillery, but different specific deaths, different near misses, different malfunctions of probability that left me alive when I should have been reduced to components. The second run, a shell landed 3 meters behind me, close enough that the shockwave lifted me off my feet and threw me forward 5 meters. But I landed on something sharp, twisted metal, maybe a piece of equipment, that punched through my uniform and into my lower back. I felt it go in, felt it scrape across ribs, felt warmth spreading as blood soaked my uniform, but the timer was at 7:23, and stopping meant dying, so I pulled myself free and kept running. The wound bled throughout the run. I made it to the target trench with 19 seconds remaining, delivered the message, and only then realized I couldn't feel my left leg properly anymore. The medici in the trench examined me with the efficiency of someone who'd triaged thousands of casualties. "Metal fragment lodged near your spine," he said. "I can remove it, but there's nerve damage. You'll have reduced sensation and motor control in your left leg. You're still mobile. You can still run." He'd pulled the fragment out without anesthetic. The medici didn't waste painkillers on walking wounded, and sent me back across no man's land with a partially functional leg and a fresh bandage that soaked through with blood before I was halfway across. I survived. Timer, 00:52 seconds remaining. The third run, chemical weapons. I was 200 meters into the crossing when I saw the shells arc overhead. Different trajectory than standard artillery, slower, deploying clouds of yellow-green gas that drifted across no man's land like fog. My respirator was rated for chemical filtration, but the clouds were thick and the gas found gaps. Around the seal, through the filter when I inhaled too deeply, through the cuts on my hands where the barbed wire had torn skin. It burned. Not fire burning, but chemical burning, or like acid on exposed tissue. My eyes watered instantly, vision blurring. My throat constricted despite the respirator. My exposed skin blistered where the gas touched it. I ran blind, following the mapped route from memory, occasionally colliding with corpses, with wire, with debris. I fell twice, got up both times, coughing blood into my respirator, feeling my lungs spasm. I made it to the target trench with 1 minute and 34 seconds remaining and immediately vomited blood and bile. The medici gave me an injection, chemical counteragent, he said, would reduce the worst symptoms but couldn't undo the damage already done. "Your lungs are burned," he explained, his voice clinically detached. "Scarring will reduce your capacity by approximately 20 to 30%. You'll be short of breath for the rest of your life. You can still run, though. You're still functional." Still functional. That was the standard now. Not healthy or uninjured, but functional, capable of completing the mission regardless of damage. The return run was agony. Every breath felt like inhaling glass. I made it with 0 minutes and 8 seconds remaining, the closest margin yet. The fourth run. I was exhausted before I started. 3 runs in 6 hours, with wounds and chemical damage, with no real rest, no food, just water, and a brief medical assessment between each crossing. My body was failing, muscles cramping, vision blurring from exhaustion, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the message tube. "I need rest," I told the officer preparing my next run. "I can't. I've run 3 times. I need—" "The war doesn't need your rest," he'd interrupted. "The war needs message delivery. Other runners are dead." You're alive. Therefore, you run. The Emperor protects those who serve faithfully. The fourth run is mostly blank in my memory. I remember starting. I remember the timer counting down. I remember running, falling, getting up, running more. I remember last rounds hitting so close that I felt the heat through my uniform. I remember climbing over corpses so fresh they were still bleeding. I remember reaching the target trench and collapsing immediately, unable to stand. Timer when I fell, 00:03 seconds. 3 seconds from detonation. They dragged me to the medici, who examined me with increasing concern. Severe exhaustion, multiple lacerations, chemical exposure, developing infection in the back wound. Blood loss approximately 20% of total volume. Borderline hypothermia from wet clothing. Malnutrition and dehydration. "Can he run again?" the officer had asked. The medic had hesitated. The first time I'd seen him show anything like reluctance. "Yes, but I wouldn't recommend." Recommendation noted. Reset his collar. Next run in 1 hour. I'd wanted to protest, wanted to refuse. But the collar was already being reset, and refusal meant a bolt round to the head, and at least running gave me a chance of survival, however small. That was when I realized the collar wasn't just a timer, it was conditioning. Every time I ran, every time I survived by seconds, my brain learned that the only way to avoid detonation was to run faster, to push harder, to sacrifice everything, health, safety, humanity, for speed. I was being trained like an animal, programmed through repeated near-death to associate survival with compliance. But the fourth return run, I don't remember most of it. Exhaustion and blood loss had reduced my consciousness to basic functioning. Run forward, don't stop, don't die. I fell multiple times. Last rounds hit me. One grazed my shoulder, burning through uniform and skin. Another punched through my calf muscle, the pain so sharp I screamed into my respirator. I kept running, because stopping meant the collar detonated, because the message was more important than the wound, because I'd been programmed to run through anything. I reached Trench Sigma 7 with the timer reading 0000. 0 seconds. I was inside the trench, safe behind the wall, when the collar detonated. No. Wait. That's not what happened. The collar didn't detonate. I was inside the safe zone. Technically, entry into the trench triggered the proximity deactivator, and so even though the timer had reached 0, the charge hadn't armed. Safety by centimeters. By probability, malfunction so extreme it violated reasonable mathematics. But I'd felt it reach 0. Had experienced, for one eternal second, the certainty that my head was about to explode. That certainty had settled into my nervous system like programming. I was afraid of the collar now, not just aware of it, afraid of it in a deep, primal way that bypassed rational thought. The fear was useful, the officers later explained. Fear motivated speed. Fear prevented hesitation. Fear was a tactical asset. That night, though night was a meaningless concept in trenches that operated on continuous shifts, I was finally given rest. 4 hours to sleep, eat, receive medical attention beyond field triage. The medic cleaned my wounds properly, restitched the worst lacerations, injected me with antibiotics that would fight the developing infections. "You're accumulating damage faster than your body can heal," he said while working. "The chemical burns in your lungs won't heal. That's permanent scarring. The nerve damage in your leg will worsen with continued stress. The lacerations will heal if you rest, but you're not resting. You're running through hell 4 times a day." "Do I have a choice?" I asked. He didn't answer. We both knew the answer. "You're lucky," he said instead, his voice carrying a bitterness that suggested he didn't believe in luck. 5 runners started today. 4 are dead. You're the only survivor. Command is calling you blessed. The Emperor's chosen, proof that faith preserves life. The Emperor protects. That phrase haunted everything now, repeated by officers, by priests, by propaganda broadcasts through the trench vox systems. But I'd seen what protection looked like. Wounds and chemical burns and nerve damage and exhaustion so deep I couldn't remember my own name sometimes. If this was divine protection, I didn't want to know what abandonment looked like. The food they gave me was corpse starch. Same as always, but my stomach couldn't handle it. The chemical exposure had damaged my digestive system, and eating caused immediate nausea. I managed half a ration bar before vomiting it back up. The sleep was worse. I lay in a recessed section of trench, surrounded by other soldiers, and every time I closed my eyes, I was running again, seeing the mud and corpses, hearing the artillery, feeling the timer counting down on my neck. I'd jerk awake, heart racing, and certain I was about to die, only to realize I was in the trench, temporarily safe, the collar still locked, but the timer inactive. 4 hours of rest felt like 4 hours of dying slowly. Then they woke me, reset the collar, handed me another message tube, and sent me running again. By day 3, by the end of my 5th successful run, I'd stopped thinking of myself as Davrin Kal. Not consciously. I still knew my name, still retained memories of my previous life, but my sense of identity had started to fragment, to reorganize around the only thing that mattered. The timer on my collar. I was becoming a function, a biological message delivery system. The person I'd been, the Vox operator who'd complained about monotony, and who'd remembered his father and worried about his brother, was dissolving into something simpler, a thing that ran through no man's land until it died or delivered. The 5th run was when I stopped feeling fear properly. Not because I'd become brave, not because I'd accepted death, but because fear is an emotion that requires a self to experience it, and my sense of self was disintegrating under the weight of repeated near-death. Fear is, I might die. But I was starting to lose the I, and without that, fear became abstract, informational, detached. I remember climbing out of the trench for the 5th run and feeling nothing. No adrenaline spike. No terror. Just recognition. This is what I do now. I run, and either I survive or I don't. The timer started. 10 o'clock. I ran. The route had become automatic. My body knew the path without conscious thought. 30 meters straight, 20 meters bearing left to avoid the dense mine cluster, 40 meters straight through the first kill zone, 15 meters right to avoid the artillery impact zone, on and on across 800 meters that my feet had mapped through repetition. My conscious mind was free to observe, detached, as if I was watching someone else run. Subject is maintaining pace despite injuries. Left leg showing reduced motor control, compensating with increased right leg effort. Breathing labored due to chemical scarring, approximately 70% lung capacity remaining. Heart rate elevated but within functional parameters. Probability of survival, unknowable. 200 meters into the run, I stepped on something that moved. A wounded man, half buried in mud, still alive. He grabbed my ankle, desperate, his mouth moving in words I couldn't hear through the artillery noise. Probably, help me, or don't leave me, or please. I pulled my leg free and kept running. Felt nothing about it. Not guilt, not empathy, not even the relief of being glad it wasn't me dying in the mud. Just detached observation, stopping would decrease survival probability. The message is more important than the wounded. 500 meters. The artillery found me. I felt the shell impact behind me, felt the shock wave push me forward, felt debris rain down. Something hit my back, metal fragment probably, punching through uniform and into muscle. Pain registered as information, injury acquired, continuing. I kept running, 600 meters. A runner was ahead of me. Someone else is crossing, different starting time but similar route. And I watched him step on a mine, watched his legs vanish in the explosion, watched him try to drag himself forward with his arms while his lower body bled out behind him. His collar was counting down, 0347. He wasn't going to make it. I ran past him, used his body as a landmark, turned right 5 meters past the legless runner, and continued. 750 meters. I could see the target trench. The timer read 2:13. Plenty of time. I was going to survive again. That was when I felt the first crack in my psychology, the first indication that something fundamental was breaking. I didn't want to survive. Not suicidal, not self-destructive. Just tired. Tired of running, tired of the collar, tired of delivering messages while men died around me. While survival had stopped feeling like success and started feeling like punishment. A punishment where I had to keep running, keep surviving, keep experiencing this again and again. But my body kept running anyway, because the collar didn't care about my psychological state. The timer counted down regardless of whether I wanted to survive. My legs moved because stopping meant detonation, and even though I was too exhausted to care about survival intellectually, my brainstem still cared, still fired the neurons that kept me moving. I was a machine now, a meat machine that ran because it was programmed to run. I reached the target trench with 1 minute 47 seconds remaining. Delivered the message, received the reply, prepared to run back. The officer in charge, a captain whose name I'd never learned, looked at me with something like awe. 5 successful runs, he said. In 3 days. Do you know what the survival rate is for runners? I didn't respond. Couldn't remember if I cared about survival rates. Less than 3% make it past their first run, he continued. The Emperor truly protects you. Your faith must be extraordinary. Faith. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or explain that faith had nothing to do with it, that I was surviving through probability malfunction, that the Emperor, if he existed at all, was so far removed from this mud-soaked hell that his protection was a sick joke. But I didn't have the energy for explanations. Reset his collar, the captain said. Send him back. Timer, 10 o'clock. I ran. The return run is fragmented in my memory. I know I made it. I survived, obviously, because I'm narrating this. But the experience exists as disconnected images rather than continuous narrative. Running through a cloud of flies, billions of them feeding on the corpses. Falling into a shell crater filled with water and bodies, coming up gasping, covered in decay. Seeing my own hand, reaching out from the mud, and realizing for one impossible second that I was looking at my own corpse before recognizing it was just another dead runner who looked like me. Reaching the trench with 0:34 remaining and feeling absolutely nothing about survival. They gave me the standard rest period, 4 hours, medical attention, food, sleep. But sleep was impossible now. Every time I closed my eyes, I was running. The timer was counting down behind my eyelids. The mud was pulling at my boots. The collar was seconds from detonation. I lay in the trench, eyes open, and staring at nothing, while my mind replayed the crossings in endless loop. I couldn't distinguish between memory and present. Couldn't tell if I was currently running, or currently resting, or currently dying, and everything after was just neural activity in a dying brain. You're in shock, the Medicae said when he found me like that. Psychological trauma. Your mind is fracturing under the stress. Can I still run? I asked, because that was the only question that mattered. Yes, you can still run. Then it doesn't matter. He'd looked at me for a long time before responding. You've internalized it. The conditioning. You've accepted that your only value is message delivery. That's what the collar does. It breaks your psychology until all that remains is the function. I understood what he was saying. Understood that I was being destroyed, reduced to a tool, dehumanized through repeated near death. But understanding didn't change anything. The collar was still locked around my neck. The timer would still count down when they sent me running. and I would still run because the alternative was detonation. "The Emperor protects," I said, testing the phrase, hearing how it sounded in my mouth. It sounded like propaganda, like lies, like something I'd been conditioned to say because saying it made the officers comfortable, made them believe the system was righteous and holy instead of simply brutal. "The Emperor protects," the Medicae repeated, but his voice was hollow, empty of conviction. Neither of us believed it. On my 6th run, I died for the first time. Not metaphorically. I actually died. Heart stopped, brain activity ceased, and physical death confirmed by every medical standard. It happened at 400 meters into the crossing. Artillery, a shell landed close enough that the shock wave stopped my heart. I felt it happen. One moment running, heart hammering in my chest. Next moment, nothing. No heartbeat, no breath. Just falling, hitting the mud, consciousness fading to black. The timer on my collar when I died. 5:47. I was dead for approximately 90 seconds, according to the report I heard later. A Medicaid team operating in no man's land. There existed apparently medics who ran between shell holes providing emergency triage. Found me, confirmed death, and then decided to attempt resuscitation because the message tube was still sealed, meaning the orders hadn't been delivered yet. They'd used a portable defibrillator. Shocked my heart. Once. Twice. And 3 times. On the 4th shock, my heart restarted. I woke up in the mud, surrounded by strangers in medical gear, with the timer reading 2 minutes and 3 seconds. "You're alive," one of them said. "The message. Do you still have it?" I did. Still clutched in my hand, preserved through death. "Then run. You have 2 minutes." I ran. With a heart that had just been restarted, with lungs that had just begun breathing again, with a brain that had just recovered from clinical death, I ran the remaining 400 meters and delivered the message with 0018 seconds remaining. The officer who received it looked at my collar reading and laughed, actually laughed, as if my near death was amusing. "The Emperor truly protects you," he said. "To survive that timing, divine intervention, you're blessed." I died, had actually medically died, and they were calling it divine protection. That was when I finally, completely understood. There was no protection. The Emperor didn't intervene, didn't care, might not even exist as anything more than propaganda. I'd survived because a Medicaid team happened to be nearby, because they had equipment, because they decided the message was worth the effort of resuscitation. I'd survived through human intervention and medical technology. Not faith, not divinity, not protection, just accident and effort and the cold calculation that a living runner was more valuable than a dead one. They kept sending me back. Run 7, run 8, run 9. By day 5, I'd crossed no man's land 14 times. 14 successful deliveries when the average runner didn't survive their first attempt. None the statistical improbability of my survival had become so extreme that officers from other sections came to observe me, to see the blessed runner, to witness proof that faith preserved life. They assigned me higher priority messages. More critical orders. Mission essential communications that required the most reliable runner, and I was the most reliable because I kept not dying. I was valuable now. Her asset. A proven survivor. This should have been good. Valuable soldiers received better treatment, better rations, more rest. But being valuable meant being used more. It meant running more frequently. It meant carrying the messages that absolutely could not fail. It meant responsibility for other men's deaths. Run 15. I carried orders for an artillery barrage, targeting coordinates, timing, payload specifications, and the orders reached their destination with 1 minute and 2 seconds remaining on my timer. The barrage occurred as scheduled. It killed approximately 847 enemy soldiers, according to the after-action report I overheard. I delivered the orders that killed those men. My running, my survival, had made their deaths possible. I was complicit. I felt nothing about it. Run 19, I carried retreat orders, pull back from an untenable position, consolidate at a secondary trench line. The orders reached the unit with 0034 remaining. The retreat occurred. In the process, the unit abandoned 57 wounded men who couldn't move quickly enough. Those men were captured by the enemy, interrogated, and executed. I delivered the orders that killed them. My survival had enabled their deaths. I felt nothing about that either. The numbness was complete now. Yet I ran through no man's land, through mud and corpses and artillery, carrying messages that would kill men, and I felt no emotion about it. Not guilt, not horror, not even detached curiosity. Just function, receive message, run, deliver, run back, repeat. I was a tool. Tools don't feel guilt about their use. By day 7, new runners were being assigned to Sigma 7. Command had observed my survival and decided to increase runner deployment. If one runner could cross no man's land repeatedly, then others could too. They just needed proper motivation, the collar, and proper example, me. I was present when they fitted the collars on the new batch. 40 men, mostly communication specialists like I'd been, all terrified, all facing their first run across the killing grounds. They looked at me, the veteran runner, and the miraculous survivor, like I was proof that survival was possible. I said nothing to them. No encouragement, no warnings, no advice. What was there to say? That survival was possible but unlikely? That the collar would condition them to run until they died? That the Emperor's protection was propaganda and they would survive or die based purely on probability? They wouldn't have believed me anyway. They still believed the propaganda. Still thought faith mattered. One of the new runners approached me before his first crossing. Young, maybe 19, his hands shaking as they locked his collar. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you survive?" I looked at him, really looked, forcing my detached consciousness to focus on his face, his fear, his hope that I had answers. He reminded me of Petrick, nor the devout Vox operator who'd believe the Emperor protects. I wondered if Petrick was dead. Probably. The bunker had been hit. Most communication personnel were dead by now. "I run," I said. "That's all. I run until I reach the destination or I die. There's no secret, no technique, no prayer that helps, just run." "But the Emperor," he started. "The Emperor isn't in no man's land," I interrupted. "It's just you in the mud and the probability that you'll die. Run fast. Don't stop for anything. The message is more important than your life." I'd meant it as practical advice, but I saw his face fall, saw the hope drain away, replaced by terror that I'd just confirmed his worst fears. He died on his first run. Stepped on a mine at 300 meters. The explosion killed him instantly. His collar detonated 30 seconds later, adding a second explosion to destroy his corpse. 39 other new runners died that day. Some to mines, some to artillery, some to weapons fire, some to simple exhaustion and drowning in the mud. I survived. Run 23, 24, 25. I kept surviving while they died. I was training new runners now. Command had decided that my survival experience should be shared, that I should teach other runners how to cross no man's land effectively. It was a promotion, they said, recognition of my value. I taught them the routes, the timing, the patterns of enemy fire, how to spot mines, how to navigate shell craters, how to breathe through chemical clouds, and I watched them die anyway because teaching didn't change the fundamental mathematics. Most runners died, and no amount of training altered that, and I was complicit in their deaths too. Every runner I trained, every technique I shared, made the message runner system more efficient. made command more willing to send more men across the killing grounds. My survival wasn't just personal, it was proof of concept that enabled more deaths. I understood this, recognized it clearly, and I felt nothing. The numbness was total now. Perfect. I'd stopped being a person who experienced emotion and become a function that delivered messages. The collar had completed its conditioning. I was the ideal runner, fast, reliable, empty of human weakness like fear or empathy or moral conflict. Run 32. I was crossing no man's land when I saw a runner ahead of me. One of the men I'd trained, running his third crossing. He was hit by lace gun fire, multiple rounds punching through his torso. He fell, so still alive, clutching his message tube. He saw me approaching and reached out, desperate, trying to hand me his message so it could still be delivered. I ran past him, didn't take his message. That would violate protocol. Each runner carried specific assigned orders. Didn't stop to help. Stopping decreased my survival probability. Just ran past while he died in the mud, still reaching, still trying to complete his mission. I felt nothing about it. He was a failed delivery system. I was a functional delivery system. The difference was survival, and survival was the only metric that mattered. That night, during rest period, I overheard officers discussing runner statistics. Davrin Kyle has completed 32 successful crossings. Loss rate for other runners remains at 87% first-run mortality. His survival is statistically impossible without divine intervention. The Emperor protects the faithful. Kyle must be extraordinarily devout. We should leverage his survival. Use him for propaganda. Show the troops that faith preserves life. They were going to make me a symbol. Proof that the Emperor protected loyal soldiers. Evidence that the system was righteous. I didn't object, didn't explain that my survival was probability malfunction, not divine intervention. Didn't mention that I felt nothing about faith, about the Emperor, about anything except the timer on my collar and the need to reach the destination before detonation. I'd become complicit in the propaganda too. My silence was agreement. My continued survival was evidence. I was helping them lie to other soldiers, helping them maintain the fiction that faith mattered, so that the Emperor cared, that suffering had meaning beyond simple brutality. I was a tool, and tools don't object to their use, even when their use perpetuates lies. On day 9 during Run 37, I died again. Different cause this time, chemical weapon, direct exposure, my respirator failing from cumulative damage. I felt it happen, my lungs spasming, my throat closing, my vision darkening as oxygen stopped reaching my brain. I collapsed at 500 meters, the timer reading 4:12, knowing I wouldn't reach the destination, knowing the message would fail, knowing I was dying. I welcomed it. Not actively. I wasn't suicidal, wasn't seeking death. But death meant the running stopped. Meant the collar no longer mattered. Meant release from the endless cycle of crossing and surviving and crossing again. I died thinking, finally it's over. But it wasn't over. The same Medicae teams found me again, administered chemical counteragents, cleared my airway, restarted my breathing, brought me back. I woke up with 1:47 on the timer, still 400 meters from the destination, with lungs that had just been revived from chemical death. "Run," they said. "You still have time." I ran, because the collar didn't care that I'd died. The timer kept counting regardless of clinical death, and my body, restarted and functioning, still responded to the conditioning, run or detonate. I delivered the message with 00:09 seconds remaining. 9 seconds from detonation. From death, that would have been permanent this time. The officer receiving the message looked at my condition. Chemical burns visible on exposed skin, respirator cracked and failing. My breathing a wet, labored rasp, and smiled. The Emperor truly protects his faithful, he said. To survive chemical death and still deliver? You're proof of his divine will. Divine will, not medical intervention, not Medicaid skill, not my conditioned body running through death. Divine will. I wanted to scream at him. Wanted to explain that there was no divinity here, no protection, no emperor watching over me. Just medicine and conditioning and probability that kept misfiring. But I couldn't speak. My throat was too damaged from the chemicals. So I just stood there, silent, while he praised the Emperor's protection. They sent me to the field hospital after that run, not because they cared about my survival for its own sake, but because I'd become too valuable to lose to simple medical neglect. The hospital was a bunker 3 kilometers behind the lines. She's staffed by Medicaid with actual equipment, actual medicine, actual ability to treat serious injuries. The head Medicaid examined me for 2 hours, documenting every injury I'd accumulated. Nerve damage to left leg, moderate severity. Chemical scarring in both lungs, severe, permanent. Multiple lacerations in various stages of healing. 3 partially healed fractures, ribs, left radius, right foot. Chronic infection in the lower back wound. Malnutrition, severe dehydration. Psychological trauma, advanced. Accumulated exhaustion beyond safe limits. Patient has died twice and been resuscitated both times. He paused after listing everything, looking at his data slate with something like awe. You shouldn't be functional. By every medical standard, you should be in critical condition, unable to walk, much less run through no man's land. The fact that you're still completing missions is miraculous, I supplied, my voice hoarse from chemical damage. I was going to say impossible, he corrected. But yes, Command is calling it miraculous, evidence of the Emperor's favor. What do you call it? I asked. He was quiet for a long time before answering. I call it torture. Your body is being destroyed incrementally. Each run adds damage that doesn't fully heal before the next run. You're dying slowly, cell by cell, system by system. The collar keeps you running, keeps you functional despite catastrophic cumulative injury. You've become a medical impossibility, too damaged to survive, too conditioned to die. Can I still run? I asked, because that was the only question that ever mattered. Yes, you can still run. So your body will continue functioning until something fails catastrophically. Could be tomorrow, could be months from now, but you're already past the point where most men would be dead. Then it doesn't matter, I said. He looked at me like I'd said something profound, or profoundly broken. You've internalized it completely. The conditioning. You've accepted that your only value is function. Do you even remember who you were before the collar? I tried to remember. Tried to recall Davren Kale, the Vox operator, the man who'd joined the Guard to avoid starvation, who'd had a father and brother, who'd wanted something beyond immediate survival. The memories were there, but distant, faded, like they belonged to someone else, someone who'd existed before the collar, before no man's land, so before death and resuscitation and the endless running. No, I admitted. I don't remember who I was, only what I am. And what are you? A message delivery system, a letter with legs. The stamps are made of my own blood. The Medicaid had no response to that. What could he say? I was describing myself accurately. I'd been reduced to function, to purpose so narrow that nothing else remained. He treated my injuries as best he could, repaired my respirator, cleaned and stitched the worst wounds, gave me injections that would fight the infections. Then he cleared me for return to duty. I ran 17 more times over the next 3 days, runs 38 through 54. I died again on run 42, heart stopped by artillery shockwave. Resuscitated in 103 seconds, continued running. I delivered the message with 0021 remaining. I died again on run 49, drowned in a shell crater, inhaled water and mud, lungs stopped. Resuscitated in 74 seconds, continued running, delivered the message with 1 minute and 4 seconds remaining. 3 deaths, 3 resuscitations, 3 successful deliveries despite clinical death. Command was ecstatic. I was proof, absolute, undeniable proof, that the Emperor protected his faithful, that faith preserved life, that devotion was rewarded with survival. They made me propaganda, put my image on recruitment posters. Runner Davren Kale, 54 successful crossings. The Emperor protects the faithful. They had me speak to new recruits, tell them that faith made survival possible, that the Emperor watched over those who served loyally. I said the words they wanted. Say delivered the propaganda with the same mechanical efficiency that I delivered messages. And I felt nothing about the lie, because feeling required humanity that I no longer possessed. I was a tool. And tools serve the function they're designed for, whether that function is delivering messages or delivering lies. By day 14, I'd completed 81 successful crossings. 81 times across no man's land and back. More than 1,600 kilometers total distance. Run through mud and corpses and artillery with the collar counting down my life in 10-minute intervals. The statistical probability of my survival was so low, it might as well have been 0. Mathematically, I should have been dead 79 times over. But I wasn't dead. I was functioning, still running, still delivering, still dying incrementally, one crossing at a time, but never dying completely enough to stop. And that was when I finally understood the true horror of my situation. I couldn't die. Not permanently. Because every time I died, they brought me back. Restarted my heart, cleared my lungs, injected me with stimulants, and sent me running again. My body was a resource they'd invested in, a proven delivery system too valuable to waste. As long as there was any possibility of resuscitation, they would revive me. I was trapped in a cycle of death and resurrection, dying repeatedly but never permanently. Consciousness persisting through clinical death, through cessation of all vital functions, through states that should end awareness but didn't because they kept restarting me. I was immortal, and immortality was hell. My name is Davren Kyle, and I have died 5 times in 3 days. Actually, that's not accurate anymore. It's been 14 days now, not 3, and I've died 9 times total, not 5. But the opening I narrated earlier was what I'd been thinking during run 5, when I believed 5 deaths was significant. Now, at run 81, 9 deaths seems almost routine. I'm standing in Trench Sigma 7 on the planet called Vorkan's Rest, waiting for the whistle that will send me running across no man's land again. The collar around my neck displays the timer, 10 o'clock, ready to count down the moment I start running. This will be run 82. If I survive, there will be run 83 and 84. And however many more until probability finally corrects and I die permanently. Except I'm starting to doubt that permanent death is possible anymore. They've modified my body. Not obviously, no visible augmetics, no machine parts replacing human tissue, but subtly, internally, with chemical enhancement and medical intervention that's accumulated over 14 days of running. Stimulants injected before each run to keep me functioning despite exhaustion. Counteragents for chemical weapons. Blood volume enhancers to compensate for repeated hemorrhaging. Neural stabilizers to prevent psychological collapse. I'm not entirely human anymore. I'm human tissue running on chemical programming, sustained past natural limits by medical technology and imperial pharmacology. The Medicae explained it during my last medical assessment. Your body should have failed completely by run 30. The cumulative damage is incompatible with survival. But we've been supplementing your system, enhancing your metabolism, stimulating your healing, overriding your body's natural shutdown mechanisms. You're alive because we keep you alive. Your survival isn't miraculous, it's pharmaceutical. But Command doesn't tell the troops that. Command says I'm blessed, that the Emperor protects me, that faith preserves life. The propaganda posters don't mention the stimulants, don't mention the resuscitations, don't mention that I've died 9 times and been dragged back each time because the message was more important than whether I was alive to deliver it. The posters show a clean, uniformed runner standing heroic with the caption, "The Emperor protects the faithful." The reality is me, covered in mud and chemical burns, respirator cracked and failing, left leg numb from nerve damage, or lungs scarred and laboring, standing in a trench that smells like corpses, waiting to run through hell again because the collar around my neck will explode if I don't. I've stopped feeling human, stopped thinking of myself as a person with agency, with future, with any existence beyond the next 10-minute interval. I am a function, a system, a biological message delivery mechanism that happens to retain enough consciousness to recognize what it's become. The other runners fear me. Not consciously. Fear is the wrong word. But they look at me with a mixture of awe and horror, like I'm something unnatural, something that shouldn't exist. They see a man who's died 9 times and keeps running. They see proof that survival is possible. But they also see what survival costs, the wounds, the exhaustion, the emptiness where a person used to be. And new runners ask me for advice. I tell them the same thing every time. Run fast, don't stop. The message is more important than your life. They hear it as practical guidance. They don't understand I'm describing the conditioning, the reduction of human existence to single function, the programming that the collar installs in your nervous system through repeated near death. They die anyway. 97% mortality rate for first-run crossings, unchanged, despite my teaching. I've trained hundreds of runners over 14 days. 7 are still alive. The rest are components of the mud in no man's land. I feel nothing about their deaths, nothing about my survival, nothing about the messages I deliver or the men who die because of those messages or the war that grinds forward regardless of individual suffering. I'm empty. Perfectly, so completely empty. The collar has hollowed me out, removed everything except the function, and now I continue because continuing is all I know how to do. The whistle blows. The timer activates, 10 o'clock. I climb out of the trench and run across no man's land for the 82nd time, through mud made of dissolved soldiers, carrying orders that will kill more men, running because the collar compels me, and because stopping would mean detonation, and because I've forgotten how to exist as anything other than a message with legs. The stamps are made of my own blood. They have always been made of my own blood, and they always will be. For however many runs I survive, for however many deaths and resuscitations I experience, but for however long this war continues, and Command needs messages delivered across terrain too deadly for anything except disposable humans with explosives locked around their necks. I am Davrin Kyle. I am 22 years old. I have died 9 times and survived 81 crossings and lost whatever made me human somewhere in the mud and corpses of no man's land. And I will run again, and again, and again. Until probability finally fails permanently, or until the war ends, or until I've been running so long that I forget I was ever anything else. This is what it's like to be a message runner in a trench war in Warhammer 40K. This is what the Emperor's protection looks like. This is what happens when humans become tools, when life becomes function, when survival stops being blessing and starts being curse. This is hell. And I've been living in it for 14 days that feel like 14 years, running through death repeatedly, dying and being resurrected, and running again in an eternal cycle that I cannot escape, because the collar won't let me die permanently, and Command won't let me stop running. I am a letter with legs, and I will be delivered one way or another, across however many kilometers of killing ground it takes, until there's nothing left of Davran Kale, except the function he was reduced to. Run 82. I make it across with 0 minutes and 46 seconds remaining. Standard. Routine. Unremarkable, except for the casualty I'd become numb to observing. 2 other runners attempting the same crossing, both dead before reaching 400 meters. Run 83. Timer ends at 1:12. A good run. No injuries. No death this time. And just 800 meters of running through artillery and weapons fire and mud. Delivered successfully. Run back successfully. Run 84. Timer 00:03 seconds remaining when I reach the trench. 3 seconds from detonation. The closest margin yet besides the time I died and got resuscitated. The watching soldiers cheer like it's entertainment. Like my near death is proof of something glorious, rather than proof of a system so brutal it measures survival in single seconds. New runners arrive at Sigma 7 on day 16. 50 fresh troops, recently reassigned from communication duties, about to receive their collars and their first missions across no man's land. I'm required to give them orientation, part of my propaganda value. The blessed survivor teaching the faithful how to endure through faith. I stand before them in the trench, and my uniform stained permanent red-brown from the mud, my respirator cracked but functional, my body showing obvious evidence of cumulative damage. I can see their faces registering horror and hope simultaneously, horror at what they're seeing, hope that if I survived, maybe they can too. You've been assigned as message runners. I begin, delivering the speech I've given dozens of times now. You will carry written orders across no man's land. The distance is approximately 800 meters. You will have 10 minutes to cross and deliver. The collar you're about to receive contains a frag charge set to detonate if you fail to reach your destination in time. I pause, watching their expressions shift from confusion to understanding to terror. The survival rate for first runs is approximately 3%. Most of you will die. The ones who survive will run again and again, until probability corrects and you die anyway. There is no escape from this assignment except death or the war ending, and the war isn't ending. This isn't the speech command wants me to give. They want me to talk about faith, about the Emperor's protection, about how devotion preserves life. But I've stopped delivering that propaganda, not from moral awakening. I'm too empty for moral positions. But from simple accuracy. Lying takes effort, and I've stopped having effort for anything beyond running. Some of you believe the Emperor protects, I continue. That faith will preserve you. I won't tell you that's wrong. Belief might help you run faster, might give you purpose to survive for, but understand. I've completed 84 crossings. I've died 9 times and been resuscitated. My survival isn't faith. It's medicine and probability malfunction and the fact that command keeps dragging me back because I'm valuable as a message delivery system. One of the new runners, young, maybe 18, his hands already shaking, speaks up. But you survived. That means survival is possible. That means we can too. I look at him, really look at him, and see myself 16 days ago, terrified but hopeful, believing that competence and effort might be enough, not yet understanding that survival in no man's land was random chance dressed up as merit. Survival is possible, I confirm, 3% possible. If you survive your first run, your probability of surviving subsequent runs increases slightly. You've learned the routes, developed the conditioning, proven you can function under pressure. But the math is still against you. 84 runs doesn't mean I'm skilled. It means probability hasn't corrected yet. Eventually it will. For me, for you, for everyone who runs. So what do we do? Another asks, desperation clear in his voice. Run fast, I say. Don't stop for anything. Not wounded, not debris, not other runners. The message is more important than your life, more important than other lives, more important than anything except reaching the destination before the collar detonates. When you run, you'll want to help people, to show mercy, to be human. Don't. Humanity decreases survival probability. Function increases it. Become a delivery system instead of a person, and you might survive long enough to regret it. Silence follows my words. I've broken protocol completely. I'm supposed to be encouraging them, and not explaining the psychological destruction the collar causes. But I've stopped caring about protocol. Caring requires humanity I've had programmed out of me. A commissar appears beside me, his bolt pistol visible on his hip, his expression suggesting he's displeased with my speech. "Runner Kyle," he says, his voice carrying warning. "Your comments are unorthodox. The recruits need encouragement, not nihilism." "They need accuracy," I respond, and I'm surprised to hear defiance in my voice. Not because I've developed moral courage, I haven't, but because accuracy is part of function, and lying is inefficient. If they believe survival is faith-based, they'll pray instead of run. Prayer doesn't stop artillery, running does. The commissar's hand moves toward his bolt pistol. For one moment, I think he's going to execute me for insubordination, and I feel something like relief. Execution would end the running, would stop the cycle of death and resuscitation, would release me from the collar. But he doesn't draw. Instead, he says, "Your value as propaganda exceeds your value as corpse. For now. But your usefulness has limits, Kale. Remember that." He walks away, leaving me with the new runners. They fit the collars on all 50 recruits. I watch them lock the metal around each neck, see the recruits' expressions shift as they feel the weight, understand viscerally that their lives are now measured in 10-minute intervals. "The Emperor protects," one of them whispers. Prayer or hope or desperate mantra. I don't correct him. Let him believe if belief helps. I believed once too, so before No Man's Land taught me that protection was propaganda and survival was pharmacy and death was the only certainty. They send the first wave of new runners over the trench wall. 10 men running simultaneously, their timers all starting at 10 o'clock, their paths spreading across No Man's Land to overwhelm enemy targeting. I watch from the trench as they run, as they die. The first falls at 30 meters. Mine detonation, legs gone, collar still counting down while he bleeds out in the mud. The second makes it to 100 meters before laser gun fire punches through his chest. He falls forward, crawls for maybe 10 meters, then stops moving. The third, fourth, and fifth die in an artillery barrage that impacts at 200 meters, converting all three into component materials indistinguishable from the mud. The sixth makes it to 400 meters before a shell crater's edge collapses under him. He falls into water, weighted by his uniform and equipment, drowns while the timer counts down on his submerged neck. The seventh, eighth, and ninth die between 500 and 600 meters. 1 to mines, 2 to concentrated weapons fire. The 10th, the one who'd asked what to do, who'd looked desperate and terrified, makes it to 700 meters. I can see him from the trench, running hard, actually going to survive, actually going to make it. Then he stops. Just stops running, standing still in No Man's Land, his body rigid. I understand immediately what happened. Psychological break. The stress, the fear, the horror of running through hell while corpses surround you and weapons fire tries to kill you. It broke his mind. And he stopped being able to run, stopped being able to function. His collar detonates at 0000, converting his head into red mist. 10 runners, 0 survivors, 100% mortality rate for this batch. They send the next 10 over, then the next 10, then the next 10. By the time all 50 new runners have attempted their first crossing, 3 have survived. 3 out of 50, 6% survival rate, better than average actually. Command will consider this batch successful. The 3 survivors are brought back to Sigma 7, their collars deactivated temporarily. They're in shock, eyes wide, breathing rapid, hands shaking uncontrollably. They've just run through hell and survived, and their minds are trying to process what they experienced. "You'll run again in 6 hours," an officer tells them. "Rest period first. Medical check. Food." Size then back across. One of the survivors, the youngest, the one who'd been 18, starts laughing. Not humor laughing, breaking laughing, the kind of laughter that means psychology is fracturing. 6 hours, he repeats through the laughter. 6 hours, and I do that again, and again, and again until I die. The Emperor protects, the Emperor protects, the Emperor. A medici injects him with something, sedative probably. The laughter stops. The survivor collapses, unconscious, still breathing but mercifully unaware. "He'll be functional after rest," the medici says. "Psychological break is normal for first-run survivors. They recover once the shock passes." I remember my first run, remember the shock and terror and disbelief that I'd survived. Remember thinking that surely one run was enough, that they wouldn't send me back, that I'd done my part. I've run 84 times since then. The shock never really passes. You just go numb to it. They send me across again that evening. Run 85. Standard crossing. Timer ends at 1:28. No death this time, no injuries. Just function. The 3 new survivors run their second crossings the next day. 2 of them die. The 3rd survives, making him a proven runner now, valuable enough to keep using. He looks at me afterward with understanding, horror and understanding. He's grasped what I'd tried to explain in my orientation speech, that survival isn't blessing but curse, that the caller will send him running until he dies, that he's trapped in a cycle he cannot escape. "How long?" he asks me. "How long did you survive?" 85 runs so far, I answer. 16 days total. 9 deaths, the 9 resuscitations. "And you're still—" He struggles for words. "Still human?" I consider the question. Consider what human means when you've been reduced to function, when you've died repeatedly, when you run through corpses and carry messages that kill people and feel nothing about any of it. "No," I answer honestly. "I'm not human anymore. I'm a message delivery system that used to be a person named Davrin Kyle. The person died somewhere around run 20. What's left is just the function." He looks at me with pure horror, seeing his future in my present, understanding what the collar will do to him, given time. "The Emperor protects," he whispers, and it sounds like a question now instead of a statement. I don't answer. There's no answer that would help. The Emperor doesn't protect. Medicine protects, temporarily. The probability protects, randomly. The collar protects command's ability to send messages across terrain too deadly for vehicles or Vox equipment. But human runners, we're not protected. We're expended. The cycle continues. New runners arrive, die. The survivors run again, die. A tiny percentage survive multiple runs, become like me, functional, empty, running until probability corrects. And I continue with them, running 86, 87, 88 times across no man's land, dying twice more. 11 total deaths now. Being resuscitated twice more, delivering messages that contribute to a war that grinds forward regardless of individual suffering. On day 23, during run 109, I had a realization that would have broken me if I'd still been human enough to break. The war doesn't need to end. The Imperium doesn't need victory. The system is perfect as is, eternal and self-sustaining. We're not fighting to win, we're fighting to continue fighting. This understanding came while I was running through no man's land, through mud composed of dissolved soldiers, past corpses of men who died yesterday and last week and 7 months ago when this campaign began. The front line had moved maybe 200 meters in 7 months of warfare. 200 meters at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives. That's not progress. That's maintenance. That's the system consuming bodies to perpetuate itself. I delivered hundreds of messages by this point. Orders for attacks, for retreats, for artillery barrages, for troop movements. And I'd started to notice patterns. The same orders repeated cyclically. Attack, fail, retreat. Consolidate, attack again, fail again, retreat again. The ground we took one week, we lost the next. The positions we held were abandoned and retaken and abandoned again in endless cycle. We weren't trying to win, we were just trying to keep fighting. In the collar system, the message runners, the calculated cruelty of 10-minute timers and explosive charges, that wasn't a wartime emergency measure. That was permanent infrastructure. They'd built the collar system into standard operating procedure. Had training protocols, had statistics on survival rates, had calculated the optimal number of runners to deploy per day based on message volume and expected mortality. This wasn't an ad hoc solution to Vox failure. This was how the Imperial Guard communicated in trench warfare. Had been for decades, probably. Would be for decades more. So the system was working exactly as designed. And I was part of it. Not a victim. Not anymore. Not after 109 successful runs. A component, a functional element that made the system more efficient. My survival proved the system worked. My propaganda value encouraged more troops to accept the collar. My training increased runner survival rates just enough to keep the message delivery system functioning. I was complicit. Deeply, thoroughly complicit in a system that ground humans into components and called it holy service. The Emperor protects. That phrase haunted everything, repeated by officers and priests and propaganda broadcasts. But I understood now what it really meant. The Emperor protects the system, protects the Imperium's ability to wage eternal war, and protects the machinery that consumes humanity and converts it into military function. Individual humans. We weren't protected. We were fuel. The collar was a perfect metaphor for the entire Imperium, a control mechanism that forced compliance through threat of immediate death, that conditioned soldiers to sacrifice everything for the mission, that reduced humans to tools and called the reduction sacred. And like the Imperium, the collar worked. I was proof. I'd been destroyed psychologically, damaged physically, killed repeatedly, and I was still functional, still running, still delivering. The collar had achieved its purpose, convert a human into a delivery system and maintain that conversion until the unit fails, catastrophically. I was the Emperor's protection made manifest, not rescued from death, but prevented from dying permanently. Kept functional through medicine and conditioning and systematic dehumanization, serving the Imperium faithfully because I'd been programmed to serve and lacked the humanity to refuse. This is what the Imperium does, I realized. Not just to runners, to everyone. Guardsmen are bullet delivery systems. Tech priests are maintenance systems. Administratum clerks are data processing systems. Everyone is reduced to function, stripped of humanity, and pointed at the Imperium's enemies until they fail. And we accept it. Because the propaganda tells us service is holy, because the priests promise that suffering has meaning, because the alternative to serving is execution, and at least service gives the illusion of purpose. The Emperor protects, but he only protects the system that exploits us. The machine that grinds us into components. The eternal war that justifies every atrocity as necessary service. We're not fighting for humanity's survival. We're fighting because the Imperium is a machine that can only function through conflict, that requires constant warfare to justify its brutality. That would collapse if peace ever became possible because the population might realize they're being exploited rather than protected. The war on Vorkan's rest will never end. Not through victory or defeat, but through eternal stalemate that consumes troops and material and lives in perfect balance, maintaining the system indefinitely. And I will keep running, keep dying and being resuscitated, keep delivering messages that perpetuate the machine. Because the collar doesn't allow refusal, and I've been conditioned too thoroughly to resist even if it did. I am the system. The system is me. There's no distinction anymore between Davrin Kale and the function he was reduced to. This is the Imperium. This is what the Emperor's protection looks like. Not salvation, but exploitation. Not mercy, but grinding efficiency. Not humanity, but machinery wearing human skin. And I cannot escape it. Cannot die permanently. Cannot stop running. Cannot do anything but continue until my biological components fail so catastrophically that even resuscitation becomes impossible. I am eternal. And eternity is torture. My name is Davrin Kale. I'm 22 years old. I've completed 147 successful crossings of no man's land. I've died 14 times, been resuscitated 14 times. I've been running for 38 days. The collar is still locked around my neck. It will be locked there until I die permanently, or until the war ends, whichever comes first. The war won't end, so the collar will be there until I die. Except I'm starting to believe I can't die. Not permanently. They've modified me too extensively, augmented my metabolism with chemical enhancement, programmed my nervous system through repeated conditioning, invested too much medical resource in keeping me functional. I'm too valuable to let die, too proven as a delivery system, too useful as propaganda. I am immortal by virtue of being too important to kill, and immortality is the worst punishment imaginable. Day 41. Run 173. I'm crossing no man's land through rain, actual rain, not chemical runoff, just water falling from polluted sky. The rain is washing some of the mud away, and revealing what the mud was hiding, corpses, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, layered into the substrate like geological strata. I'm running on death, have been for 41 days. Death compressed and layered and turned into terrain. One day, probably soon, I'll be part of that terrain. I'll die on a crossing, death number 15 or 20 or 50. And the resuscitation won't work, or will work, but I'll die again before delivering the message. And my body will join the mud, will become part of the substrate that future runners cross. My corpse will become terrain. And the war will continue. The runners will continue. The system will continue. Nothing I've done matters. 173 successful deliveries, and the front line has moved less than 300 meters. The messages I've carried, the men who died because of those messages, the orders I've delivered, all of it was just the system maintaining itself, the machine consuming inputs and producing nothing except continuation. I am meaningless. My survival is meaningless. My death, when it finally comes, will be meaningless. And yet I cannot stop, cannot refuse, cannot do anything but continue running when the whistle blows and the timer starts, because the collar has programmed me too thoroughly, because my body responds to the countdown even when my mind recognizes the futility, because I am a tool and tools serve their function until they break. The rain is cold. It soaks through my uniform, mixing with the mud, with my sweat, with the blood seeping from wounds that never fully heal. I can taste the rain, metallic, chemical, wrong. Nothing on Vorkan's rest is clean. Not the water, not the air, not the war. I can see new runners being collared in Sigma 7 as I approach. Fresh troops about to make their first crossings, about to learn what I learned. That survival isn't blessing, but curse. That the Emperor doesn't protect. That the Imperium is a machine that consumes humanity and calls it holy service. Some of them will die immediately. Some will survive a few runs. Maybe one or two will survive long enough to become like me. Empty, functional, running until biology fails. I want to warn them, want to tell them that survival is worse than death, that the collar will destroy them more thoroughly than any weapon. But I've lost my voice for warnings, lost my humanity for mercy. Lost everything except the function. I'm a message delivery system, a letter with legs. The stamps are made of my own blood, and I've bled enough to mail 1,000,000 messages across this corpse-field wasteland. The timer on my collar when I reach Sigma 7, 0011 seconds. 11 seconds from detonation. From death, that would have been my 15th. From release that I will be denied because they'll resuscitate me again, restart my heart again, send me running again. The officer receiving the message looks at the timer and smiles. The Emperor truly protects you, Kyle. 11 seconds. Divine providence. Divine providence. Not medicine or conditioning or probability. Divine providence. I want to laugh. Or scream. Or explain that there's nothing divine here, nothing protected, nothing except systematic exploitation dressed up as faith. But I don't have the energy for explanations anymore. Reset the collar, I say. Gee, I'm ready to run again. This is what it's like to be a message runner in a trench war in Warhammer 40K. This is what happens when humans become tools, when survival becomes function, when the system reduces you to purpose so narrow that nothing else remains. This is the Emperor's protection, not rescue but exploitation, not salvation but eternal servitude, not mercy but machinery that grinds forward forever, consuming the faithful and calling their consumption holy. I am Davren Kale. I am a letter with legs. I'm running through hell on a timer that counts down my life in 10-minute intervals, and I will run until probability finally fails permanently, or until my body fails so catastrophically that resuscitation becomes impossible, or until the war ends. The war won't end. So I will run forever, dying and being restarted, and crossing no man's land through mud made of dissolved soldiers, delivering messages that perpetuate a system I cannot escape. The timer resets. 10 o'clock. The whistle blows. I climb out of the trench and run across the killing grounds again for the 174th time, through rain that tastes like chemicals and blood, past corpses that will include mine someday, carrying orders written by men who will never set foot in no man's land, serving an emperor who doesn't protect anything except the machinery that consumes us. The stamps are made of my own blood. They always have been, they always will be. Forever.